The silent daughter of the vampire king hasn't spoken a single word to anyone, human or monster, since the night her world changed. But in a bright little cafe, a human waitress quietly draws a chocolate heart on her empty plate, offering kindness instead of fear. That simple, sweet gesture melts ancient shadows, teaching both father and daughter that sometimes love is stronger than blood or darkness. People in my city still talk about the night the vampire king walked into our little family restaurant. I was there, just a tired waitress refilling sugar jars, when the door opened and the air changed like a storm had stepped inside. It was a Tuesday, the kind of slow, sleepy night when the biggest drama was whether the coffee machine would survive another hour. The lights were warm, the smell of fries and tomato soup hung in the air, and a soft old love song played over the speakers. Then, without warning, every conversation broke off at the same time. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. The bell above the door chimed once, and a tall, pale man in an old-fashioned black coat crossed the threshold like he owned the darkness itself. His hair was long and white, falling over his shoulders like winter snow. His face looked carved from stone, beautiful and terrifying at the same time, and his eyes, they were the color of fresh spilled wine, glowing faintly in the restaurant's yellow light. People had seen him on screens, in shaky news footage from the peace talks, but seeing the vampire king in person was different. You could feel him. The air cooled, the shadows stretched, and even the humming of the refrigerator in the back seemed to hush, as if the room itself was holding its breath. He wasn't alone. A small hand, thin as a bird's wing, clung to the sleeve of his coat. A little girl stepped in behind him, half hiding in the folds of velvet. She wore a simple white dress, her blonde hair falling in soft waves to her shoulders, but there was something strangely ancient in the way she moved, too careful, too quiet. Her skin was almost as pale as his, and her eyes, a soft gray, did not rise to meet anyone's gaze. She just stared at the floor, as if the weight of the world lived there at her feet. "The princess," someone near the counter whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "The one who doesn't speak, not to anyone." It was a rumor everyone knew. They said the vampire king's daughter had gone silent the night of the fire in the old mountain castle. Some claimed she had seen something so terrible it stole her voice. Others said a curse had sealed her words away. All we really knew was that in every photo, every piece of news, she never spoke, never smiled, never looked at the camera. Just like now. My manager, Raoul, appeared at my elbow so fast he almost made me drop the sugar jar. His face had lost all its color. "Table 7, he whispered, forcing a smile onto his lips that did not reach his eyes. "Seat them, be polite. Don't provoke him, no jokes, no mistakes." His hand shook slightly as he straightened his tie. "And for heaven's sake, don't stare at his eyes." The vampire king's gaze swept the room once. People froze under it, but instead of the cruel smile the stories always mentioned, there was something else in his face tonight, something tired. He gave a small nod to no one in particular, as if apologizing for existing, and then gently guided his daughter toward an empty corner booth by the window. He moved with absolute grace, but his hand on her shoulder was careful, almost hesitant, like he was afraid she might break. I forced my legs to walk over, tray tucked against my side to hide the trembling in my hands. "Good evening," I managed, my voice thinner than usual. "Welcome to Sunny Diner. Can I get you anything?" It sounded stupid the second I said it. What do you offer a king who rules the night? He looked up at me, and for a heartbeat I forgot to breathe. His eyes glowed brighter up close, but there was no hunger in them, no threat. Only exhaustion and something that looked a lot like worry. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice smooth but carrying centuries of weight. "My daughter and I would like something warm." He glanced at the menu, the corner of his mouth twitching in a bittersweet almost smile as he read the simple items. She used to like sweet things. The girl did not look at the menu. She slid into the booth and folded her small hands on the table, staring at the wood as if she could fall into it. She didn't fidget, didn't look around, didn't do any of the restless little things normal children do. There was only stillness, heavy and unnatural, like someone had pressed pause on her life. Up close, I noticed faint shadows under her eyes, like she hadn't slept properly in a very long time. He sat across from her, his royal posture shrinking just a little once he was out of the public eye. Slowly, he reached across the table and adjusted a loose strand of hair behind her ear with careful fingers. It was such a soft, human gesture that it clashed violently with the stories of his brutal past. "Leah," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that probably only the two of us could hear. "If you do not like it here, you can tell me. Just one word. Any word." She didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the empty tabletop. His hand hovered in the air for a second longer and then retreated, curling into a fist in his lap. For the first time, I saw something that shook me more than his power, pure helplessness. The kind a father feels when love is not enough to fix what's broken. The restaurant tried to act normal around them, but the fear was too thick. A boy at the next table dropped his coloring pencil, and it rolled in a slow, perfect line right to the Vampire King's polished boot. His father grabbed his arm before he could get up, whispering sharply, "Leave it! Leave it!" The boy's eyes filled with confused tears. I saw the king's jaw tighten at the sound. Before the boy could start crying, the king's hand moved. In one smooth, impossible fast motion, he bent down, picked up the pencil, and placed it gently on the edge of the boy's table. "You dropped this," he said, voice calm and low. The boy froze, then nodded, too stunned to say thank you. The king gave him the smallest hint of a smile, something almost shy, then turned back to his daughter as if nothing had happened. Around us, people exchanged puzzled looks. This was not the monster from their nightmares. This was complicated. I took their order, warm milk for the girl, black coffee for him, pancakes, if you have them at this hour, he added, almost apologetically. When I brought the drinks, I noticed his fingers around the coffee cup. For a creature everyone said had ice in his veins, he held the hot porcelain like someone standing close to a fire after a long, bitter winter. Across from him, the little girl wrapped her hands around the glass of milk but didn't lift it to her lips. "Leah," he tried again, even softer now. "Do you remember when your mother used to sneak you into the castle kitchens? You would steal the cook's chocolate and insist everything tasted better with it." There was a ghost of warmth in his eyes as he spoke, a flicker of memory. "You would not stop talking then." His voice cracked on the last word. "Just tell me if you are all right." Nothing, not a nod, not a shake of the head, not a blink that could be read as yes or no. The silence around their booth grew heavier, pressing on my chest like a weight. I saw it land on him too, the way his shoulders sagged, the way his eyes dropped to the table as if he was the one being punished. For a moment, he did not look like a king at all. He just looked like a father who was losing his child inch by inch to something he couldn't see, couldn't fight. I felt a strange heat behind my eyes, and it scared me more than his red gaze ever had. I had promised myself I would just do my job, stay polite, stay distant. But watching that silent little girl and that broken, dangerous king, something inside me twisted. Fear said, "Stay away." Compassion whispered, "Do something." My hand drifted automatically toward the dessert station, where the bottles of chocolate syrup stood in a neat line beside the whipped cream. I wrapped my fingers around one of them without even thinking, my heart pounding so hard it felt like everyone else in the restaurant could hear it. I knew approaching them again with anything they hadn't ordered could be a terrible idea. It could cost me my job. It could cost me far more than that. Still, as I looked back at their corner booth, the silent girl, the king staring at the table like he was staring into a grave, one thought drowned out all the others. Somebody had to try. I didn't know it yet, but what I was about to do with that simple bottle of chocolate syrup would change not just their night, but the fate of our entire city. By the time I reached the kitchen door, my courage was already arguing with my common sense. The order wheel clicked, the fryers hissed, and the cooks shouted over each other, but all of it sounded far away, like I was underwater. I set the chocolate syrup bottle on the counter beside the finished pancake, and my reflection in the metal warmer looked just as scared as I felt. Raoul spotted me and frowned immediately. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, nodding toward the syrup. Something small, I said, though my throat was dry. Just something kind. For him, Raoul's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. Are you crazy? He's not a regular customer, Maya. He's the Vampire King. We don't experiment on the Vampire King. We survive the Vampire King. I glanced back through the little round window in the door. The king sat completely still, hands folded, eyes fixed on his daughter. She hadn't touched her milk. She hadn't touched anything. She looked like a statue someone had forgotten to finish. She's just a kid, I muttered, and he looks like a dad who's out of ideas. Raoul shook his head, fear and frustration mixing on his face. You're not a therapist. You're a waitress. Bring the food. Smile. Walk away. Don't draw, I don't know, cartoons on his plate like he's on a kid's menu. It's not a cartoon, I said, and I heard the stubbornness in my own voice. You know how we do it. Sad kids get chocolate hearts. It's our thing. It's simple. It's human. I picked up the pancake plate before he could argue again. If he hates it, I'll apologize, but I can't just watch her drown in whatever that silence is. Raoul closed his eyes for a moment, like he was praying for my sanity. When he opened them, his shoulders dropped. Fine, but if he looks even a little angry, you run back here, you understand. He pointed at the back exit. And I mean run. I understand, I said quietly. My hands were shaking, but I held onto the tray anyway. I'll be careful. The noise of the kitchen faded as I stepped back into the dining area. Every footstep toward their booth felt louder than it should have, echoing in the strange calm that surrounded them. Conversations picked up here and there, but they were thin, nervous things, like people were pretending to talk just so they wouldn't be caught staring. When I reached their table, the Vampire King looked up first. Up close, the red of his eyes wasn't just frightening. It was tired, like a candle that had burned too long. His gaze flicked to the pancake, then to the syrup bottle in my other hand, and one pale eyebrow arched a fraction. Not angry, curious. I brought your food, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. And if it's all right, I'd like to make something special for the princess. The word princess slipped out before I could stop it. It felt safer than your daughter, and somehow more honest. Across from him, Leah did not move, but I felt her attention shift just a little, like a curtain rustling though no wind was there. The king studied me for a long, tense second. The air seemed to cool another couple of degrees. Most people avoid speaking to her, he said finally. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness under it, a hidden blade. They are afraid of saying the wrong thing. So am I admitted, because lying to someone who could probably hear your heartbeat felt pointless. But I'm more afraid of saying nothing. Something in his expression changed at that, just a tiny crack in the mask. A flicker of surprise, maybe even respect. He inclined his head, formal and oddly gentle. Very well, you may try. I set the pancake down in front of him, then placed an empty white plate in front of Leah. Her small fingers twitched, the slightest movement I had seen from her all night. I took a slow breath, uncapped the chocolate syrup, and let my hands do what they had done 100 times for crying children and birthday kids with frosting on their noses. The syrup flowed out in a thin, glossy line, dark against the white porcelain. I started at the top, curving down in a smooth arc to form one side of a heart, then mirrored it on the other side, letting the two lines meet in a soft point at the bottom. I moved carefully, almost ceremonially, aware of every eye in the room resting on my hands. The sweet smell of cocoa rose between us, warm and familiar. In this diner, I said quietly, speaking more to Leah than to anyone else, we have a rule. Nobody leaves without at least one small heart made for them, especially on their hardest days. The heart was simple, just a shape made of chocolate, but against the silence at that table, it felt almost sacred. Leah's gaze finally lifted from the blank tabletop, inch by inch, until her gray eyes rested on the dark, shining heart. For the first time, her expression wasn't empty. It was confused, curious, afraid. I straightened, suddenly aware of how quiet the restaurant had become. The music over the speakers had reached the end of a song and not yet started another. The clink of dishes in the far corner sounded distant. Even the humming refrigerator seemed to hush, as if the whole place was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The king's eyes were fixed on the heart too, but the look on his face was different. Not confusion, recognition. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup, the ceramic creaking softly under his grip. "Who taught you that?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I blinked, thrown by the question. I don't know," I said. "My grandmother used to do it, for kids who came in crying after school. She said chocolate hearts help people remember they're loved." I managed a weak smile. It's silly, but it works sometimes. A muscle in his jaw jumped. For a moment, the red in his eyes flared brighter, and I felt a pressure in the air like a storm front rolling in. Then, as quickly as it came, it faded. His hand released the cup. "It is not silly," he said, and there was something raw in his tone now. "My queen used to draw the same heart for Leah, in the castle kitchens, with chocolate when she could steal some, with jam when she could not." The world seemed to tilt for a second. I stared at the simple shape on the plate, suddenly aware that I had stepped into a memory that didn't belong to me. A private memory. Leah's eyes widened, the gray in them turning glassy. Her lower lip trembled, so faintly you would have missed it if you weren't searching her face the way her father and I were. Around us, a few customers exchanged uncomfortable glances, as if the story of their lost queen was something too intimate to hear. But no one turned away. Even the boy with the coloring pencil leaned over his seat, watching the princess with wide, hopeful eyes. Leah's hand lifted off her lap, slow and stiff, like someone moving through deep water. Her fingers hovered above the chocolate heart, shaking just a little. A single drop of syrup clung to the tip of one line and fell back with a tiny, sticky sound. For a heartbeat, I was sure she would snatch her hand back and retreat into herself again. Instead, she touched the heart. Her fingertip dragged lightly through the chocolate, smearing one side of it. She stared at the dark streak on her skin as if it were something from another world. Then, very slowly, she brought her finger to her lips. The moment the chocolate touched her tongue, her whole body reacted. Her shoulders flinched. Her eyes squeezed shut. A tiny, broken sound escaped her throat. Not a word, not yet, but not silence either. Her other hand clenched into a fist on the table, knuckles white. It was like watching someone wake up from a sleep they did not choose. "Leah," the king's voice shook for the first time. He leaned across the table, both hands now resting on the edge, pale against the dark wood. Power rippled off him in a wave I could almost feel on my skin. The lights above us flickered once, just for an instant, and a collective shiver ran through the diners. I realized, with a small jolt of fear, that I might have done more than remind a child of her mother. I might have just broken whatever fragile spell was keeping the vampire king's grief contained. Leah opened her eyes. Tears had gathered there, trembling but not yet falling. She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time I saw something there that had been missing all night. Life. Not joy, not yet, but a spark of something ancient and intelligent and deeply hurt. "I'm sorry," I blurted out, unsure if I'd gone too far. If this reminded you of something painful, Her gaze shifted to her father, and the apology died in my throat. Time seemed to slow around us. The kitchen noise, the soft murmur of customers, even Raoul's anxious pacing behind the counter, all of it faded into a low, distant blur. There was only the girl, the king, and the small, imperfect heart between them. She opened her mouth. The king froze, like a statue carved from fear and hope all at once. His fingers dug into the table so hard I thought the wood might splinter. Every person in the diner leaned in without meaning to, caught in the gravity of this one impossible second. For months, for years, the world had waited to hear the vampire king's daughter speak again. Doctors had tried. Sorcerers had tried. Peace negotiators had whispered their careful questions into her silence. And now, in a cheap vinyl booth under buzzing fluorescent lights, with chocolate on her lips, she finally formed a word. "Papa!" Her voice was small and hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in a long, long time, but it was clear, undeniable. The sound of it cracked right through the king. His shoulders sagged, and his face crumpled in a way that no camera had ever captured. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might actually weep. "Leah," his reply was barely a breath. "I am here, I am." She cut him off with her next word, and this time her voice held something else. Fear. "They're coming," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the restaurant windows as the first distant roll of thunder rattled the glass, though the sky had been clear only minutes before. "The fire is coming back." The lights above us flickered again, longer this time. Somewhere outside, car alarms started blaring all at once. Every hair on my arms stood on end as the vampire king slowly turned his head toward the dark glass door. Whatever he saw reflected there made the red in his eyes blaze like open embers. "Everyone," he said quietly, his calm voice suddenly carrying an unmistakable command that made the air itself feel heavier. "Stay inside. Do not go to the windows." Around us, the restaurant held its breath for the second time that night. But this time, it wasn't only for a little girl's voice. This time, it was because the nightmare she had finally spoken about might already be on its way.